Hi everyone, I'm Dan Hennessy. I'm now a data analyst with the CitySat team in OPI, so working on a whole bunch of different issues across the city. But I got started through the Data Fellows program working on issues related to the Baltimore City Fire Department and EMS.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeanette Perthel. I am currently an operations research analyst with Baltimore City Fire Department. Just started this position. Previously, I was an OPI Data Fellow working alongside Dan on fire department issues.
Great. So we're sharing a link to the style guide in the chat right now, but this is a resource designed in large part by Melanie to help data analysts organize their visualizations. It's broken down into a few major sections, including design principles, so the values that should be clear throughout the work that you're doing, user-centered design, tailoring your visualizations to make sure that they're meaningful and relevant to your particular audience, accessibility, so making sure that all users can engage with the work you're putting together, and style, so how we can use design choices to help really enhance the message of our work through data visualization. So so in the design principles, clarity is one of those key issues, and this is an area that I sometimes struggle with as an analyst. That might have a lot of information, a lot of things I want to say, but trying to be simple is better. Say less in any given visualization. It's better to break things down, have multiple smaller visualizations that'll be clearer for your audience to understand.
Great. So the second design principle is accessibility, and this is a quote from the Interaction Design Foundation, and it basically says, users, regardless of their ability, face challenges in demanding contexts. So when you design for all levels of ability, you can create a product or service that anyone can use. Great. So three accessibility uh, subsets of accessibility. The first one, visual accessibility. There's diversity, equity, inclusion principles, and then digital equity. So for visual accessibility, this includes color and text and size considerations. For example, some people are colorblind, so that's a consideration to have. And then diversity, equity, inclusion principles include being mindful of your language, for example, using the phrase Black residents instead of just Black, and then refraining from using colors that are traditionally associated with gender or race when you're reporting on those topics. And then finally, digital equity. This includes being mindful of formats. So some individuals may be viewing your content on a smartphone. So how your content is formatted can influence a user's accessibility to it. So a deeper look into visual accessibility, colored blindness, and visual impairments. Color is a key element in visual accessibility. About 7.4% of the US population can't detect red or green or detect them differently. About 12 million adults over 40 have some sort of visual impairment and need corrective lenses. And then sleep related impairments affect 50 to 70 million Americans. So choosing colors that are accessible for all abilities is very important. And some of the examples of colors that are not accessible are over here on the right side of the screen. So red and green are obviously can't be detected by individuals who are colorblind. I also read recently that red and people who are colorblind also can't detect really between red and black. And then blue, purple, and dark pink are all very vibrant colors, and together they can really interfere with each other and cause something called visual vibration, which affects your readability. And then bright yellow and white also don't pair well together and also cause that visual vibration. Okay, so the next design principle, continuity. So continuity in designing visualizations provides your user with, consistency and assurance. For example, on the right side, there are two charts that I personally made for the Baltimore City Fire Department's internal EMS operations dashboard. These two charts are showing similar time-based metrics, so median and 90th percentile in minutes. And as you can see, I use the same color purple for the 90th percentile and then the same color blue for the median. And I do this consistently throughout the report. So, if a tired EMS officer is reviewing times for their division, they'll be able to quickly and recognize what is and what's not, and will be less likely to misread information. So this again ties into the visual accessibility piece.
The next principle is effectiveness. So the guide will walk through some examples of how people understand and process information so that you can use that to help guide your work. And this is just sort of a quick walkthrough of some of the key steps that you can take in that process. So first, identify what the point you're trying to make to the audience is. And then the guide will explain some of the different tools you can use, so your chart type, color choices, highlights, and various tools to help make sure that that point is really clear and really convey that message effectively to the audience. So then what we'll talk about next is how you can actually take these lessons from the guide and apply them into your projects. And one element of the guide that's really helpful is that it's tool neutral. So this works if you're building a large PDF report or a dashboard, but also if you're just building a one-off graph in Excel or R or whatever your given tool might be, all of these lessons will apply regardless of your choices there. So the first step you can go through is identifying the types of visualizations and formats that you're going to be presenting your information in. Once you have that, you can start to build your custom palette and kind of create that visual language that you're going to be using across your project. And then build out your project templates so that you'll ensure that consistency that we've talked about and also save yourself a lot of time in the process of putting your project together. And then move on to usability testing and make sure that what you've produced works for the audience that it's intended for. So the first thing to identify your visualization formats is inventory what you're going to need. The guide covers a lot of the most common types of visualizations, as well as a few that are less common that you might want to use, and talks about when those are the most appropriate and some of the ways to optimize each of those. And so as you put that list together, we can identify the key elements that you're going to need. Do you need solid colors for your bar graphs? Do you need gradients for maps? Do you need categorical breakdowns for the types of data that you have structured? And what elements do you need to help support that? Do you need callout boxes, highlights? What font choices do you want to make? And as you put that list together, we'll then move on to building the palette that we're going to be using and that visual identity to the product. So once you have that list of elements, we can then begin assigning colors and other design choices to the elements we've identified. The guide includes a sample of colors that tend to work pretty well for a lot of the most common uses. I'm a bit of a practical person, so I'll maybe take that aquarium blue and rename it after whatever I'm intending to use that for. If that's my on-time percentage, I'll rename it as the way I intend to use it. So that way I'll make sure I'm using the right color consistently throughout my project. Tend to associate similar colors with similar variables. So maybe all of my time variables will use those blues. I'll use those yellows and oranges for a different kind of category. And this is a good time to go check back in on those accessibility principles that Jeanette mentioned. There's some tools linked in the guide that will help you test your palettes, make sure that they work for different visual accessibility needs.
Great. Okay, so our next step in developing our project is creating our project template. This is a super important step when you're developing your visualizations. And the first thing you want to do is make your wireframe. So this is where you take all of those visualization types and formats that Dan identified in step 1, and you actually arrange them into a blueprint or a map. You can see examples on the screen right here. So wireframes are done in black and white and gray to help you focus on the content and the layout rather than specific design elements like colors and stuff. And then the next great part of making your wireframe is using a grid. Grids are amazing. Grids changed my life after I learned about them. I see everything in grids now. And grids are basically, you can see it in the front or in the top photo. Using a 3 to 4 column grid can help you organize the arrangements of your charts and information into a visual hierarchy, which will guide your user through the report, through reading the report. And then grids also create white space, which is super important for readability. And then finally, you're going to keep for reuse. The wireframing template is going to act basically as your master plan through your implementation, and then you can use it again for the next reports. When I was creating the EMS dashboard, most of the pages of the report have a very similar design layout and grid system. So keeping and reusing your template, it's going to help keep the report uniform and consistent, and then also saved me a lot of time on trying to place things in certain spots. Usability testing. Okay, so usability testing is the last step of your implementation, and it's the process where you really evaluate your product by assessing how the end user interacts with it. Typically, in a usability test, what it involves is a tester performs tasks while an observer watches, listens, and takes notes to gauge how easily the user interacts with the project. And then, so the first step of a usability test is identifying those testers. So for me, on my project, I definitely use testers that were going to use the product. So mostly just EMS personnel, but it doesn't have to be necessarily so formal like that. You can ask anyone to test, so your peers or colleagues. You can come to coding office hours. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays every 2 weeks, or you could maybe ask for volunteers in one of the data network team channels. There's all these different people that can be your testers. And then the second part of usability test is facilitating your testing session. This is where you actually sit down with a person and have them perform these tasks that you want to see if your design is working. And this can be an informal or a formal session. It can be virtual or not virtual. But the important thing about facilitating is, identifying those tasks you want your user or the tester to perform beforehand, and then really trying to remain an observant, a viewer, not trying to, help them out. You really are there to watch them, how they use it. And then finally, you want to implement those changes. So synthesizing your notes after all of your usability tests and identifying where improvements in the design can be made. For me, when I was doing usability tests for the EMS dashboard, one of the design elements that was challenging for users was the use of the drill down features on charts to see more granular data. A lot of times users either didn't know that it was available to them to do that, or they didn't know how to use it. So one of the changes that I implemented after usability testing is I added a question mark icon. You can see this is the first one on the top is what I first initially started out with, and this is the changes afterwards. And this question mark icon, if you hover over it, it will say like you can use drill downs on this chart. And then if you don't know how to use drill downs, you can click on the question mark and it will direct you to an advanced features page, which basically does like a step-by-step explanation on how to use drill downs on these charts. So yeah, those were the changes that I made, some of the changes that I made after my usability testing.